Hello and welcome to Let's Have a Go. My name's Jordan, thank you for joining me. So this is the second episode in our Knitting for Beginners, and if you haven't checked out the first one, I would recommend going and doing that, especially if you haven't knitted at all before. It gives you a few good tips just to pick up the needles to get started. I'll put a link up for you to be able to click on. But for now, let's have a go. We're going to look at 5 tips, tricks and mistakes to avoid when knitting. So tip number 1 is understand the stitches. See, this is going to save you so much time, and probably out of all 5 tips that I give you, this is the most important one. If you understand how a stitch is meant to look once it's knitted, and if you understand how it's meant to look on the needles as well, you are going to save time by seeing a mistake when it appears within your knitting work very quickly. You won't start knitting lots and lots into your project and then realise at that point, oh no, I've made a mistake. What you can do is pick that up, correct it and carry on, saving you loads of time. Also, if you make a mistake, then you can take it back to a point and reset it. You know exactly where the last time is that you've made a mistake, and you can reset it to a point and make sure that it looks exactly how it needs to, so that you can proceed without making any more mistakes straight away. So those are the time-saving techniques that you'll have from it. In order to be able to do that, you can maybe look up what stitches look like on the internet or in books. That's really helpful. That really does give you a good grounding. But what I would recommend is, if you make sure to knit, and when you know that you've created a row with no mistakes in it at all and it's nice and neat and you're happy with that, just take a little bit of time to look at the stitches, see how they come together, maybe pull the stitches apart a little bit just to see how all of the yarn interlocks, and understand where everything crosses over, where it all needs to go. And that sort of helps you imprint in your mind what you're looking for and what you need to look out when something doesn't look right. Tip number 2 is start a project and complete it. So knitting squares and rectangles is really great. You can get the techniques nice and keep on going. It's nice and repetitive, but you don't really progress in any way at all when doing a rectangle or a square. They're just rectangles and squares. It's really great to start to get your teeth into a project fairly quickly once you start knitting. So within a couple of days of starting knitting, I bought a kit that helped me to make this beanie. So it wasn't great, it's by no means great at all. In fact, it's quite badly made. But what it did is it motivated me to actually complete something. I had to restart many times when making this beanie. But once I completed it, I thought, hey, I've completed something, I can make other projects as well. And it really helped me to pick up a few techniques. This isn't just a rectangle, it helped me to shape. I had to learn a few techniques along the way to be able to do that, to be able to make the bobble on the top as well. So that was really helpful for me. And yeah, I would recommend that you do that. And I wouldn't recommend picking a scarf as your first project, because essentially that's just a rectangle, isn't it? So you're not going to be making any of those other techniques. You're just going to be going straight on until the end. It's a popular one, but maybe avoid. Maybe try something that's a little more complex, but not too complex. Point number 3 is visit yarn shops. Now, when you first start out knitting, I would 100% recommend going to a yarn shop. There's so many benefits from going to a yarn shop. You can see what's available to you. There's lots of yarn varieties, lots of things to build your inspiration up, get you motivated to try out different projects. There's lots of information that's there. Those people that have been knitting for a long time, and you can pick up tips and tricks from them. You can also see maybe patterns. There's lots of patterns available that will help you to maybe pick something out, a project to begin with, and help you to start with that. And it's a real tactile way of understanding knitting. If you do everything from the internet and books, then it gives you an idea of what knitting is. But when you go into a yarn shop and you can actually pick up some of the products, see them, and see what other people have created in the flesh or in the yarn, you can really begin to understand what knitting is all about, and you can make some projects of your own. But don't fall into the trap that I did. When I went to the yarn shop, I got really motivated and I went and I picked out a yarn. It was a little pricey, but it wasn't too bad, but it was more expensive than the cheaper yarns. And the person who was in the yarn shop, they knew that I was a beginner, and they said, maybe you don't want to pick up an expensive yarn like that, maybe go for a cheaper yarn. But I was determined, I wanted that yarn. And when I got home, I had no plan for it. And it just sat there. I made a little rectangle out of it, and it was really quite terrible, a real waste of that yarn. My wife ended up using it in one of her crochet projects. So I didn't actually get to end up using that yarn in the end. So don't fall into that trap. Don't buy the expensive yarns too early. Build up to it. Maybe see them, build inspiration from that, but don't get drawn in. Go for the cheaper yarns first of all. Point number 4 is knit with dark yarns. Now, with this point, I wouldn't recommend doing it straight away. I did so, as you saw with my beanie, that is knitted with black yarn. And I would say that was a big mistake. It was very hard to be able to differentiate all of the knit stitches and the rows, and it proved to be very challenging and very difficult for me to be able to try and complete that. But I would say that maybe fairly early on, once you're starting to begin it, once you've maybe done 1 or 2 projects, get to the dark yarns quickly. Once you knit with dark yarns, as I said, it's very hard to differentiate all of the rows, differentiate all of the stitches. It can be a nightmare. But once you do knit with them, everything else becomes a lot easier. Knitting with all those lighter yarns, you can see everything. It's almost like knitting in HD after you've knitted with dark yarns. So maybe make a project early on with a darker yarn, and you can gain that experience. Make everything a bit more easier for you. Maybe that's a bit of a placebo effect, but it does really help in my experience. Point number 5 is get a darning needle. Now, as I said in the previous episode, you don't actually need much to start with knitting. You only need yarn and 2 knitting needles. However, you will get a project, but it might look a little bit, well, not the really great finish. It's quite difficult to maybe weave the yarn into the project once you've finished, and it can be a bit of a problem. Once you get a darning needle, lots of the things such as joining things together, finishing off a project is much easier. And so I would recommend getting a darning needle quite quickly. They're fairly cheap. You can get plastic ones, you can get metal ones. There's lots that are available to you. Make sure to get one with a large eye so that you can take lots of different yarn sizes through it, and then you can use that to finish off a piece and just give it that extra touch. And when you look at the projects when you finish, you'll think they're finished off just that bit better. So get a darning needle as soon as possible. So there we go. There are my 5 top tips, tricks and mistakes to avoid when starting out knitting. If you enjoyed them, if you found any of them useful, please let me know in the comments below. Also let me know if you've maybe started knitting as a result of these videos, or any tips that you have to give to others as well. Also make sure to give a like to that video, and also please subscribe so that you can keep up to date with all my latest videos. Thanks for joining me.